Today's collectible spot, we are having a look at the Hot Toys Aliens Alien Warrior 1/6 scale collectible figure. This is product code MMS354, and this is the Aliens Warrior, or Alien Warrior from the movie Aliens, one of Spot's favorite sequels, and one of the greatest, in my opinion, sci-fi movies of all time. The front of the box features a side profile, a very side detailed profile I might add, of the Alien Warrior, or Xenomorph Warrior. Side box art is a continuation from the front, features and shows a little bit of the arm of the Xenomorph, along with the Aliens 1/6 scale figure running down the side. Regarding the back of the package, you've got Hot Toys Presents Movie Masterpiece Series, MMS354. You've got the cast and crew responsible for releasing this figure, as well as a choking hazard and warnings that the figure is not suitable for younger ages. Final last looks have you sliding off the sleeve and showcasing the Alien Warrior inside, along with some, well, display choices with a display base and some blood splattering effect that you can add to the figure. With that being said, Spot's going to take a break. I'm going to get this opened up, and when we come back, we're going to get a better look at the Hot Toys Alien Warrior 1/6 scale collectible figure. There's more anyway, guys. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. And of course, just before we have a look at the Alien Warrior, we'll have a look at the display stand that comes included with this figure. A very fitting display stand for those fans of Aliens, as you have the floor grate interior to which the Colonial Marines are investigating the survivors. A very, like I said, impressive display stand. It does have Alien Warrior featured on the front. To be honest, it's so small, I feel like it could have easily just been omitted altogether. I mean, in this instance, because it's not using an oval-shaped display stand, we get exactly what this 6-scale figure is based from, including such a very small, insignificant placement of the character. I feel is really unnecessary, but, for what it is, I appreciate that they put it there. I like that they have all put cracks and stuff into the floor grate area there as well. Some nice additional coloring and detail added to the display base. It's simply above and beyond just giving us a circular, basic oval-shaped display base. This I certainly don't mind because it's not taking up a lot of space in a glass cabinet, for example. It's not an incredibly large size display base, so it fits perfectly the type of displaying that I like to do. One last thing, though, is the neck is a little bit different than a conventional 6-scale display base. Much more narrow, much longer, and then the top prongs in which the figure's legs are going to sit on top is a little more elongated than normal releases. We might as well get also the other accessories out of the way that come included with this guy, because unfortunately, he's pretty bare bones with the kind of stuff that he includes. Yes, in fact, the only two things that he comes included with above and beyond the display base is a pair, one larger, one smaller pair of blood splatter or Xenomorph blood splatter that can be attached in different areas of the figure. Let me show you where those can go. Regarding the smaller blood splatter, it is nice and translucent green. As you can see with my finger running behind it is a translucent plastic. The larger one is exactly the same. The larger one, however, is friction applied. The smaller is actually applied by magnets. There's a little magnet on the underside of the blood splatter, and then they've concealed a magnet on the side of the Xenomorph's head. It's actually on both sides. Simply just line it up to, you can have it the other way around if you want. Oops. The hardest part actually is just trying to figure out where the magnet is. It is right there we go. Right at the side there. Let's bring the camera back a little bit so you guys can actually see it. So the splatter is right there. You could also invert the blood, which doesn't actually stay on as well. Just like that. Or again, you can flip it around to the other side and attach it like that as well. Because it's magnets, it does a good job that you're not having to peg anything into place. The only downside, though, is simply what you just saw in the last minute or so, me trying to figure out whereabouts on here is the magnet. The magnet is actually just right there, right on the side tubing there of the Xenomorph. It's a successful effect, and I'm glad at least you don't have to peg it into place. The larger blood splatter effect is a little bit different in nature. What you need to do is, see how the backside here has slots? You can see there's little notches there. You line it up to the rib cage section of the creature, and it's force friction. So you just push that into place, and it stays well in there. It's not magnetized or anything like that, but it stays well into the torso crevice of the Xenomorph. And you can do that really anywhere by nature of the fact that those grooves sit in any place that you really want, providing, and there goes one of the other problems I have, plugs it right into place, bingo bango, and you can have that blood splatter effect. Alright, so let's now have a look at the figure and acknowledge also the arm that's fallen off, as this is one of the issues that I have with this figure. It's a beautiful sculpted figure. However, the way it's been constructed is a bit of a nightmare, and not the nightmare in space where no one can hear you scream, but still a nightmare to say, well, a nightmare nonetheless. Let's maybe have a look at his head. We'll look at some of the pros, and then we'll discuss some of the little shortcomings. Starting with pros, the head sculpt and really the rest of the body is quite nice. It's a Aliens Xenomorph, so of course it doesn't have the dome that covers over like the original Alien and Alien 3. And really, I guess everything other than Aliens, all the Xenomorphs had the same similar dome effect. The Aliens alien, however, as you can see, has more a rigid, ribbed sort of spinal top to it. The face is quite good, if you can call it a face. It's not really even quite a face, but face is quite good. The coloring actually is very impressive. It's about 4 or 5 different shades of color. I initially thought it was going to be more akin to black, but it's actually more similar to, this is a horrible comparison, but it's very similar to an oil slick. Have you ever seen oil slick on a driveway, how it has different colors to it? The Xenomorph is also very similar in that kind of coloring. You've got a primary, almost silver-like gunmetal, but then they've washed, for example, a purple. There's some blues in there as well. I even see a hint of green. There's some browns in there as well. It is definitely not a figure that is one singular primary color. So that is one thing that this figure does do very well. In fact, really, if only the RoboCop, also released by Hot Toys, if only it was initially plastic and not the die-cast, not the metal that we ended up getting it, they could have also done an excellent job of this similar multiple layered color treatment to the RoboCop as well. Because the RoboCop, if you have picked up that figure, as good as he is die-cast in that metal treatment, it's unfortunate that he misses so much of the necessary paint that makes him movie accurate. I can't say whether the alien looks this much with the silvers and the purples and the grays and browns, but it's really nicely done as opposed to just simply giving us a brown or a black Xenomorph. Sculpt-wise, the rest of the body is actually pretty good too. It doesn't seem to have as much that coloring that we were discussing with the head portion. In fact, in the torso and leg area, it seems more scaled back, a little more scaled back to that gunmetal gray and a little bit of that gold and copper color. It's still quite nice, but because the body in a lot of areas has this rubber material, and I'll talk about this in a second, it doesn't seem to have as much the paint that the head seems to have. All right, let's go back to the head because there was actually something I wanted to talk about. While the mouth is really nice and the sculpt of the face is quite good, this whole section here is a very, very soft rubber. The instructions even indicate, and I quote, Due to the nature of the material, do not keep the inner jaw extended for long periods of time to avoid deformation of the outer jaw. Because this is all soft rubber, you can even see how I can stretch it. It's very, very unforgiving for what you can actually do with mouth posability. There's a little lever on the back here that you can slide right here. You can slide it forward and back, and it brings out the outer or the inner jaw out to the front of the face. But the unfortunate thing to me is it doesn't seem like there's an option to lock it into place, and indicating by the instructions, I guess long periods of time doing this is going to stretch and deform this rubber. This is a case where design seems to supersede, or seems to outweigh actual application. I mean, it looks great, the fact that you can do this, but at the risk that this is going to get torn, stretched out of shape, or break, makes me worried. And I wish that it had not been the case. Had they only made this into a plastic material, I get it. They wanted to do something, outside the box and give us something very unique. But if it means you can't really do anything with it, or the whole time that you're doing stuff with the mouth, you're fearful that it's going to warp this, well, it's certainly a feature I would not want to use at all. In fact, actually, while we're talking about the mouth and the jaw, and how design seems to take precedence over execution, it's kind of also the same way that the rest of the body works as well. This is one of those 6-scale figures that looks beautiful, but unfortunately you can't really do too much with it. As you saw at the beginning of this review, to move his arms out any further than, in the case of the instructions, I think it actually indicates like a 30-degree angle. Anything further than this, you add or run the risk of damaging the limbs themselves. The elbows also, because everything is encapsulated with, hopefully, I don't know if you can see it or not, but this whole section here, from shoulder right down to his wrist, is all rubber. There's also a frame, obviously, inside there as well, but you can't bend it too much because you don't know, A, where the joint is going to be, and even as well, it says, due to the nature of the material, do not keep the elbows or knees bent for extended amount of time to avoid material damage. So essentially, you can bend the elbow, but you don't want to keep the elbow or the knees in a bent position for fear that it may damage the material that they used. Spot does not want to go on a tangent. I really did not want to turn this video into a tangent, but I really love this figure. I'm disappointed in the fact that because they used the material that they did, it really eliminates many possible posing options for displaying this guy, because every time you display him, you feel like you can't leave him in a position for fear that it's going to damage the rubber that's supporting everything. Also in the same way that, well, as a good comparison as well, the Hot Toys Thor also had that rubber that carried over across his body, and also Storm Collectibles did a Mike Tyson, for example, that we had to look at on this channel as well, that has that rubber overlay. I would almost be more favoring a plastic, by incorporating just a plastic frame and actual working hinges that are visible. It does not look as good, granted, but at least you could bend the elbows, you could bend the wrists, and indefinitely you could just leave it like this and you don't fear that it's going to damage the figure. If I feel like I have to display the figure like this, and the whole time then I have to keep straightening out his arms because I don't want him to be permanently damaged, that unfortunately is one thing that defeats why I would want to have picked up this figure in the first place. I would want to pick up this figure to display him in a dynamic pose, maybe display him alongside a Predator that we've already looked at on this channel, but I feel like I can't really do that with this figure. One nice touch that I do like, at least, is that the tail contains a metal wire, so you can very, very easily pose it. And you can see that this bends up. You can also bend this up at the top here as well, depending on how you want it. It doesn't seem to stay, granted, from this standpoint down. It seems to always want to stay curled, but at least of the curl, you can bend the tail accordingly depending on how you want to have him displayed. I like that at least, even though the rest of the body is, again, encapsulated in this rubber. The posability on Alien's Alien Warrior is the following. We've already looked at his mouth, and I don't want to touch too much on that further. You already know how I feel about it. Nice effect by incorporating the rubber, but again, just so unnecessary if you can't really do too much with it. For his articulation in his head, though, the Alien Warrior does have a fairly forgiving ball joint in the neck. You can rotate it quite a bit. This is one thing, one of the more visible articulation points on the figure, so at least I can bend the figure's head like this, and I don't have to worry that over time it's going to cause damage to it. Shoulders do hinge out, but you can really only hinge them to about a 30-degree angle. And over the process of doing so, the joint, or at least the joint on my figure, it's not to say that every figure is going to be like this, but I find the joint, though, on the one arm pops off very frequently. The Xenomorph's arm, let me get back actually into the socket here. There we go. The elbow does have a bend, possibly a double bend, not that you could really do all that much with it. And he also has a rotation and hinge via a ball joint in his really cool sculpted hands. In another area that seems to have visible posability, something that does not limit, or something that you should be cautious of, he does appear to have a ball joint on the upper torso portion, allowing the torso to hinge up and down, and slightly left and right. As you could probably expect it, the legs do hinge out, but it very limited. It doesn't give you really much clearance. For starters, it has a very narrow torso anyways, but from that narrow torso, it doesn't seem like you can really move the legs out all that much. Same thing as well, moving it forward and back. That's about as much as I can get out of it. I wouldn't entertain moving it any further. Again, it's really a shame that it's so limited. When it comes to his knees, he does have a hinge in the knee, but as the instructions indicate, you can only bend it to about 90 degrees. And finally, much easier to bend, the Alien Warrior does have a ball joint in the foot. Spot really wanted to like this figure. At the end of the day, the sculpt is really good, the paint is really good, but I feel like honestly Hot Toys sacrificed practical bending, posing in favor of something that was really cool and design, and on paper, why not give him a rubber frame? Makes perfect sense. We can have him a little bit more accurate, a little more maybe texture-wise, giving him the skin that he might have had in the movie, as opposed to giving him a plastic frame. The downside, though, as you can clearly see, though, giving him design over, overall structure, one suffered, and that is posability. I wish this guy could pose a lot better than what he could. The idea that you can't even bend his arms, bend his legs, or open his mouth for fear that the material that they used would over time warp, damage, tear, so on and so forth. Get this figure if you want. Get this figure as a great display piece, but understand this, displaying him, unlike other 6-scale figures, might actually be rather difficult indeed. Today's collectible spot, somewhat of a mixed bag, I'm unfortunately have to admit. Today we're having a look at the Hot Toys Aliens Alien Warrior 6-scale figure. Good sculpt, but unfortunately took design over purpose, or overall execution, I suppose. Stay tuned, guys. Spot's going to have more collectible spots heading your way. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.